the recording. So thank you for joining ACRL Distance Learning Section Discussion Group for today's midwinter virtual event, using the community of inquiry to engage online students. My name is Lindsay Wharton, and I am the co-chair of this committee with Kristen Heathcock. The DLS discussion group holds virtual discussion events to accompany midwinter and annual each year. We also hold additional online discussion events. We did a roundtable discussion last month, and we will plan events in between midwinter and annual. If you are on Twitter, we're really going to encourage you to follow along with the discussion using the hashtag DLS inquiry. Our speaker for this event is Marcia Rapchak, Director of Research and Information Skills and Instruction Librarian for Gumberg Library at Duquesne University. Marcia coordinates, assesses, and teaches for the Credit Information Literacy courses and supervises library science students in the creation of online learning objects. Her research interests include assessment and the intersection of composition studies and information literacy in instructional design. She is currently finishing up her dissertation on social metacognition in online and face-to-face information literacy courses, and will receive a doctorate in instructional technology and leadership. We will begin this session with a 45-minute presentation by Marcia on her research and the community of inquiry. Then there will be 15 minutes of questions and discussion following the presentation. Please use the chat box to ask Marcia questions at the end of the session. This session will be recorded and made available to registrants for later viewing. At the conclusion of the session, please complete our evaluation form, which we will provide the link to, and let us know what you thought of this event. Now I'm going to hand it over to Marcia so we can get started with the presentation, and I want to thank everyone for being here.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. Can you, give me the little ball? Thank you. And thanks everyone for tearing yourself away from the 24-hour news cycle. At least I know that's what I've been doing, is just mostly reading news constantly, or at least halfway tearing yourself away for this session. So as Lindsay said, my name is Marcia Rapchak, and I'm at Duquesne University. And really what I'm going to talk to you about today came from research that I did thinking I would use it for my dissertation. I ended up going a different way, but in looking at the library literature, this was something that I didn't see very much in the library literature, though it is used quite often in education. So that's something that I thought could definitely be useful for us in online education environments, even though the community of inquiry really comes from looking at online for credit classes. I think we can use it in other ways as well. So definitely, if you have questions, feel free to use that chat box. If I don't get to it during the session, I will definitely try to get it to it at the end of the session. And if you want to tweet me, that's fine as well, using that hashtag that Lindsay shared, and I'll be looking for that, anything with that hashtag. All right, so let's get talking. So I thought that this was a great, I admit I just looked for robot teacher in Flickr for this, but I thought that this was appropriate and kind of adorable. The hashtag is hashtag DLS inquiry. That's correct, I think. Lindsay can correct me in the, yes, thank you. So I thought that this conveyed fairly well some of the concerns that people have with online learning, even though this is sort of a face-to-face learning environment in this picture. But the idea that automation and online environments take out that human element, can take out the human element for the teacher, but also can take out that human element as far as, are we dealing with a real student? So what the community of inquiry model does is addresses that, so that we really experience the humanity of both the teacher and the student, that we have interaction, not just dealing with content, but having interaction between students and between instructors and students. If a learner feels isolated in an online environment, they're not going to persist. Or if a learner feels isolated from a library, they're not going to feel that that library is serving their needs. So we need to find ways through online presences, with our library websites, with our library instruction presence, and with our instruction of making sure that learners know that we're there for them and that we're real people. This is all basically coming from social constructivism, which I'm sure lots of you are familiar with. It's often credited to Vygotsky, who said that we learn from each other, and more specifically, we learn from people who are more knowledgeable from us, that by working with others who know more than us, and that doesn't necessarily mean a teacher per se, but other peers who know more than us, that allows us to grow and to learn. So how does this translate to an online environment? How do we allow for that sort of interaction that is required from a social constructivist perspective? That's really where the community of inquiry model comes in. And you see here there's some overlaps in this Venn diagram. It is where we're looking at 3 presences that are required to have a really engaging and an engaging learning environment with deep learning. And this was proposed by Garrison, Anderson, and Archer in 2000. So they said that you need cognitive, teaching, and social presence. I'll go through all of these one by one, but you can see here that these are definitely overlapping. So sometimes when I'm talking about something that helps with cognitive presence, you might say, oh, that seems like it would help with teaching presence as well. And you're probably right, because there's definitely overlaps. One thing to remember as I'm talking about the research related to this is that in 2000, when this model was created, online learning looked very different. So it was mostly text-based learning on a personal computer. So we can think about ways to, and of course other researchers have also thought about ways to modernize this model and really think about how technology can allow us to pull these presences through even more. So that first presence is cognitive presence, and it is, according to Garrison, Anderson, and Archer, the most important one. This is the presence that is most related to learning, though they all are. They thought of cognitive presence, though, as students co-creating knowledge, as students working together to interact. And for them, when they first came up with this model, it was really interacting on discussion boards, and that was it. But working through discussion boards or working together in ways that creates their own understanding, creates knowledge. They really thought that that digital medium of a discussion board allowed for even deeper and more learning, because students could interact with each other in ways that weren't necessarily immediate, but could interact in ways where they could really develop their thoughts and responses. Now, the research doesn't necessarily hold this as true, and those of you who have worked in credit classes or been embedded in a course and have worked with discussion boards, you might be able to guess how sometimes discussion boards don't really reach the level of thinking that we want to see. So what do we want to see from students? According to Garrison, they really wanted to see this construction of knowledge happen in these 4 phases. So the first step was a triggering event. So here's where students are introduced, or learners, participants, whatever you want to call them, are introduced to a gap or a problem that needs to be solved. And this creates a sense of unease. And then that's the impetus for the next step, which is exploring. So here, learners are gathering information, trying to fill that knowledge gap. The third step is integration, where students are making connections between the information that they've gathered and then hypothesize solutions. And then the resolution stage is where students actually get to start applying that hypothesis into the real world. I thought that this really worked quite well with thinking about information literacy, thinking about learning, thinking about research. And in fact, these 4 phases to me sounded very similar to some of those information-seeking models that I've been exposed to through the profession of library science, and maybe you were as well. So like Brenda Dervin's sense-seeking model, where there's a gap, students or learners or anybody tries to make sense of that through narratives, but also through some attitudes and values, some affective sides to that, and then hopefully get to an outcome. Similarly, Holthau's model of the information search process has both that affective side of it as well as the cognitive side of it, of trying to find information to fill a research need, and then hopefully feeling like you've accomplished something, being able to apply it to the real world. So that's why I thought that this model and that approach to looking at inquiry could be really useful to us. So what does the research tell us about how cognitive presence works in online learning environments? Well, one thing it tells us is that students working with each other doesn't necessarily create cognitive presence. And sometimes, of course, we can't even have students working with each other. That's not even possible. Also, looking at discussion boards, they're often ineffective at getting students through those 4 phases of critical inquiry. Now, I'm not saying they're ineffective at some of these other presences that we're talking about, but as far as leading students through finding information, integrating that information, and using that information, a lot of times discussion boards don't work well for that. Additionally, discussion boards might actually not impact teaching presence as well. So that's something that has come out of the literature, that it's really something that can be useful for social presence, but cognitive in teaching, sometimes the research says it doesn't work, sometimes it does. It's really very difficult, no matter what venue you're using, to reach resolution. That seems to be what the research says across the board, is that it's very difficult for students to be able to think about how the research that they've found can be applied to the real world. So we need to think about ways to help this. And the research gives us a couple of strategies to deal with this. And one of those ways is to have students work in role-playing or have them debate each other. It won't always lead to resolution, but it does a really good job of moving students into at least that integration stage, where they're thinking about possible solutions, thinking about how the resources they've found work with each other. So let's say, for example, you were talking about in your instruction, authority is constructed and contextual. So you could have students debate either in a discussion board, a breakout session, if you were holding something like a webinar like this, or some other format, even on Twitter, where they're debating whether or not they should use a particular resource for a class. And what works particularly well for this is if you assign students a position and say, okay, you're going to be arguing that we should use this for a class, you're going to be arguing that we shouldn't, and then have them discuss it. For something like a role-playing situation, you could even have students represent a stakeholder, trying to solve authentic issues, and then using research to support that position that they're taking. And that could be totally asynchronous. So I always try to use what I read in the literature in my courses, see how it works. And so I gave this a try of having students sort of debate each other about whether or not they should be using Twitter or Facebook as a source of information, and then debating someone who agreed with them. It's really hard to get students. This was an online discussion board, and it's very, very difficult. Even if I think it's something that might be somewhat interesting to them, it's very difficult to get students to move past that I agree statement. So this was something that at the very least got students, they couldn't say I agree. They had to talk about, well, how would you argue against that position? So that allows them to look at something from a different perspective. Another way to increase cognitive presence is by having students work together on a collaborative assignment. And this doesn't, they don't ever have to meet for this. They don't ever have to be in a face-to-face group for this. This is something that I've used in classes before where students are using Google Drive to create documents and use the chat feature, and they're able to collaborate. Even in a training session or a webinar like this, you can send participants out to a Google Doc and have them work on the document. I'm not going to be having you do that now, but it can work really well. I've seen librarians do this where they have groups of complete strangers work on a Google Doc to do something like create a lesson plan. And so that's something that takes some bravery, I think. It takes a lot of coordination, but can be a really effective way of having that participant interaction with each other, and also having people share their resources, share their knowledge, and create something that's even better than if they just did it themselves. Another way to increase cognitive presence, and you'll see we're trickling a little bit into teaching presence, is just by having that instructor intervention through the critical inquiry phases. Students really, they need help being led through these. Even, for example, that webinar I was talking about where people were creating lesson plans together, strangers creating lesson plans on Google Docs. The webinar host went to every single Google Doc and chatted with every single group to make sure they answered any questions, that everyone was on task, to give some feedback. So if professionals need that, then students definitely need that. And that can be a great way to make sure that students working together, if you're able to do something like that, are moving their thoughts forward. So even in an online discussion board, it's important not to only have students talking to each other, but hopefully you're able to push students more, ask them questions so that they expand their ideas further. So that's something that I'm always trying to do, is make sure if I'm teaching online or if I'm embedded in a course and we have a discussion board going, that I'm asking questions, not just leaving it up to the students to have a conversation together. So now I have a question for you. This is something that I think a lot of you probably deal with. So if you could take a minute to respond in the chat box, I'd be really interested in hearing your answers. So how do we increase cognitive presence when we use asynchronous learning objects that do not have student-student interaction? Is there a way to do this? Okay, so I see assess later, follow-up quiz. Asking questions and having the students respond with a video, like it. Yeah, feedback is essential. Oh, students answer each other's questions. I like that. Yeah, I think you're right, Amanda, that guide on the side, that LibWizard sort of way of doing things, that can provide some guidance through through critical inquiry that maybe we don't have always with something like just a video. Or questions, as you said, during recordings. That's a great thing. By lack of student-to-student interaction, I mean sometimes we might just have created, let's say, a tutorial or a video where students aren't working with each other, they're just working with the video or with the tutorial by themselves. If you don't have, let's say, a class that you're working with, you're just working with distance students in general. But I think we have some great responses here. So things like using assessments, having students do reflections on their own, the guide on the side, those were all things that I had thought of so and listed down here on my sheet. So some other great ideas came up as well as having students make video recording responses. So great. All right. Ah, find a better one than the one provided. I like that one a lot. All right. Yeah, assessments. So it's almost, I'm going to move on to talking about teaching presence. So it's incredibly difficult to talk about cognitive presence without also talking about teaching presence. So that's where I'm going to go. In an online learning environment, instructors have to cross both the physical boundary in a way somehow. Right now I'm crossing the physical boundary with giving you some visuals and also with my voice. But they also have to cross, according to an educational psychologist named Moore, they have to cross that psychological boundary, and he called these both the transactional distance. So how do you make students feel like you're there even if you're not physically there? In this picture, you've got a teacher who is physically there. His presence is in that room. But how do you let students know that you're there for them, that you're there part of the learning community if you're not in the room with them? There's a couple ways to do this according to the research. And actually, before I jump there, I didn't define exactly what teaching presence includes. So this includes instructional design, direct instruction, and any sort of facilitation of learning. As I said, very, very essential to feel like they're part of it. So what does this tell us, the research? Teaching presence really is so essential that when students don't experience or don't feel like they experience teaching presence, they also have lower ratings of social and cognitive presences. So they feel like without that instructor there, they don't feel like they're part of the learning community, and they don't feel like they learned as much. Different surveys have said that students really appreciate different ways of showing teaching presence. Things like facilitation of learning or feedback have been rated as most important by college and university students respectively. Then another survey of university students showed that facilitation of learning, and by facilitation of learning, that usually means jumping into discussion boards, that sort of thing. And direct instruction is the most important. But a pretty recent study showed that too much, if in an online environment, too much from that instructor, especially on the discussion boards, like too much posting or too many examples of how to do something, can actually decrease student engagement. So it's important to walk that line. Students, when they see that an instructor is jumping in too much, they tend to scale back their interaction with each other. So just something to keep in mind. We have to walk that balance. For older adult students, professionals, things like that, graduate students as well, the instructor's ability to engage higher order thinking skills is very much valued. So giving students the ability to reflect, answer, and discuss things that are difficult and challenging is really something that they expect to see. In an online training program based on this research, direct instruction was seen as most important, but not surprisingly, students want to see all aspects of teaching presence. So how do we make sure that we are present in our teaching? So direct instruction means delivering content, providing information from other sources as well, summarizing main points from sources, and providing assessment or feedback. It's probably the easiest way to have teaching presence in any sort of learning environment. This is something we can do asynchronously, synchronously, very, very well and very easily. So I'm sure a lot of you have used any sort of software. We're using one right now that allows you to provide content through a synchronous system. This definitely increases teaching presence. It explicitly places that instructor as contributing to the learning. I don't know how many of you have worked with students one-on-one at a distance, but that still counts, so to speak. So if you have anything, we have GoToTraining here and GoToMeeting. So if you're using that to work with students one-on-one, that's still a learning environment, and that's still your teaching presence. Another way to have teaching presence is that guide on the side software, which, as we mentioned before, can also increase cognitive presence. You're directly instructing students how to complete something. You can provide your teaching presence in an asynchronous manner, but students don't always see this as an instructor. So finding a way to, and this is relating a bit to social presence, but finding a way to make the guides on the sides is showing them that you're actually a real person. You can do that by making it a little interesting, having a little character, that sort of thing. And even using someone else's materials to deliver content is teaching presence. So this is a video that I was involved in. I helped to come up with the script, but it's not my voice. It's not my name. I don't think my name is associated with it anywhere, but I put it in my credit classes that I teach, and students still mention it as something that they think is helpful to their learning and that they see as me curating resources for them, and they do appreciate that. So even just curating the right resources is teaching presence and something that students will definitely notice. If you can provide feedback, that is something that students definitely appreciate. And so Barbara, you mentioned you frequently teach patrons on the phone, email, chat, and that's probably also a way where you're giving them feedback on, okay, well, I see you did this, maybe you could do that, and giving them feedback on how well they're doing something. That's a way of increasing teaching presence. It's not just a way, though, of doing that, but it's a way of increasing cognitive and social presence as well, as long as it is good feedback. So good feedback has to be specific to what they're doing. It has to be timely, as in you can't have students complete a task and then give them feedback months and months after. Orientated towards achievement, so that you're guiding them on how they can do better to achieve a goal. Designed in a friendly, not controlling way, and something that is involving them in the process of getting better. Those are all needed for good feedback. And any of the, as Barbara said, students appreciate the feedback immediately. I also like in teaching them to search database, they seem to learn more. Yeah, when they get that feedback, you definitely see more learning. The research I was looking into, do written comments or audio comments or video comments increase teaching presence? It seems like all of these do, and also cognitive presence. And any way that you're giving them feedback, as long as it's meeting the criteria that I mentioned before, really does help students with their learning. I've seen people who really feel like they are able to have more social presence, though, if they can use audio or video feedback rather than just written comments. So even recording yourself and responding to how well students did on an assignment. Oh, sorry, I just got a question coming in, and I'll answer that at the end. Thanks. So here's a question for you. Do you give feedback on asynchronous assessments for online learning? And if so, how? And you can answer in the chat box. Oh yeah, comments in the grading tools. Yeah, hopefully they look at them. Yeah, so that automatic assessments, that's a good way to give feedback that gives explanation for why the student got an answer wrong. I also try to guide students to help them try to figure out the right answer. Oh, cool, Mandy. I didn't know about the Google Forms thing. Well, it looks like you guys have some great ways that you're providing feedback on online learning. Okay, the discussion boards or announcements or automatically. Cool, great. All right. Oh, cool. Screencast of the paper. I like that idea. Okay, I'm going to move along for time, but you guys have great ideas. So another way to increase teaching presence is for instructional design. And of course, this is something that unfortunately is not something that is always appreciated. It's expected to be there, and students don't always realize that this is a teacher doing this or this is a librarian doing this. But what's included in this is creating learning outcomes, setting deadlines, using technology in a meaningful way. And as I said, they'll notice if it's not there. They won't always get view credit for it, according to the research, if it is there. There's a couple of ways to look at instructional design, several models that you might be familiar with. There's the ADDIE model, where you're analyzing the situation, the learners, the environment that you have, designing instruction, developing it, implementing it, trying it out, and evaluating it all through the way. And then the backward design model is where you identify your learning outcomes, determine what sort of evidence you would need to know that students had achieved those learning outcomes, and then plan the learning that will lead to that achievement. Another way to increase teaching presence is to facilitate learning. This is through something like a discussion board or chat boxes like we are right now, that sort of thing. One way is to ask engaging or controversial questions. Also to question participants' ideas question the participants' ideas, missing an apostrophe there, or ideas from the course or readings. Highlight important challenging points that are coming up in the discussion to try to keep it going. Make connections that are coming up in the discussion so that you model for your students how you synthesize ideas. Offer different perspectives. I'm always trying to play devil's advocate with my students a little bit because I think that gets them to think a little bit more. And then also summarizing discussions so that students know the salient points that came out of the discussion. Sometimes it can be overwhelming if you're in an online class and there's a discussion board with 60 to 100 responses to something. That's just way too much for students to really be able to handle sometimes. So summarizing that can definitely help them. And then our last presence is social presence. And this is where we have created a learning environment where there's open communication, students are respectful of each other, they share their emotional responses to content, not just cognitive responses, and this creates group cohesion. And they feel like the people in this online environment, including the instructor, like they have a sense of who these people are. They have a sense of them as people. So what does the research tell us? When we allow people, now we didn't have time for this today, but when we allow people to introduce themselves, even simply that, saying who they are, where they come from, is a way to increase social presence. Having them do collaborative projects, having them share a personal experience, hopefully related to the content, that can be helpful. Having discussions as a class may not always increase cognitive presence, but does increase oftentimes social presence. And then students being allowed to share resources that are related to the content contributes to social presence. It's important to note, though, that social presence doesn't always equal satisfaction. So even if you have a class where there's students really interacting a lot, there's a lot of back and forth between students on the discussion board, something like that, doesn't necessarily mean that they're happy with their class or learning. But other research does show us that social presence has been shown to increase cognitive presence. So if we can get students working together, that can increase cognitive presence. So one way to increase social presence is to set ideas and set guidelines for communication. So even something like a webinar like this, I try to always say something like, if you want to ask me questions, feel free to do that, or I'll answer questions at the end, but feel free to tweet with each other, something like that, so that students know that, or participants know that they can interact with me and they can interact with others. Also, if students are able to share something about themselves in a webinar or an online discussion board, this can really increase social presence. If you have online learning objects, you might consider allowing students to be able to comment on those learning objects so that other students see that a real person, quote unquote, has interacted with it. But that, of course, some people don't feel comfortable with that. Even just as I'm sure a lot of you use small group discussions, you may not always see that there's a lot of deep thinking going on, which we've talked about. But it can be a place to encourage interaction. It can be a place to encourage collaboration. And then that can increase participation from students and increase social presence. Twitter hashtags can be a way to increase social presence where people are able to use those hashtags to discuss and also use those hashtags to discuss content. Now, I have used this successfully, I have used this unsuccessfully. So I think this has been pretty successful when I've used this at conferences, which is not a distance way all the time, but can be. We have tried to use this in our asynchronous tutorials, where students are asked at the end of the tutorial to use a hashtag to discuss something, and that hasn't always worked as much. But maybe if we associated that with a class or a grade, we'd have more success. So what about you? I've got only a couple minutes, but I wanted to ask you, have you used Twitter or other social media to encourage interaction with online students or online participants? What worked? What didn't? Oh, communication you couldn't see. Huh, interesting. Oh, okay. I got you. Okay, so you were on, it wasn't that you were not on Twitter, right? Yeah, some people aren't comfortable using social media. Yeah, and some people use different social media. Yeah, I agree, hit or miss. All right, well, thanks. Yeah, yeah, not a lot of students on Twitter necessarily. Okay, so I don't feel too bad that ours didn't work out very well. So something that you can make sure that everyone has access to if you're holding a synchronous session like we are right now, breakout rooms can be a great place where you have students who wouldn't contribute to the whole group, but they feel much more comfortable contributing to that small group. Humans love to be part of groups. They form groups very quickly. So that's something that you can make sure that students feel like they're part of a learning community. But teaching presence is often very much useful and needed here, even if you're just assigning a student to be the group leader. That way you can have someone who's sort of leading discussion. Video conferencing doesn't show much improvement for learning, but it does show increased social presence. So that's something that if you're wanting to show your face or show the faces of other people you can use, sometimes that creates technology issues, but if you have a smaller group, it is possible, and that does allow your students to feel your social presence. There is a 34-item survey that is validated for assessing the community of inquiry. It's popping up right here, hopefully, that you can see. I won't go through all of those, but if you just Google that, you should be able to find these questions. And I don't expect that you'd be giving them to classes necessarily, but I think it's a good way to see what do we expect out of a community of inquiry. What does that look like? There are a couple issues with the model. Some people argue that social presence isn't really necessary for learning. Those people have been attacked in the literature to a certain degree, but there are some people who argue that. There are others who say that there's another presence or called learning presence, but Garrison, Anderson, and Archer say, no, 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 that's metacognition. That's part of cognitive presence. And then the other issue is that this is just self-reporting many times or discussion board analysis. So there needs to be more research looking at how the presences influence actual authentic assessments. So I just want to leave you with this conclusion. And in my mind, all the presences are related and necessary. Even if you are not looking at students who are working together, but a social presence is necessary between you and a student. Teaching presence, essential throughout. and presenting content is not enough. And now I need to cough and answer questions.
Thank you, Marcia, for that great presentation.
You're welcome. Sorry, I was losing my voice at the end there, so. But I'm
no
happy to answer
at all.
questions.
Yes, so we have 15 minutes for questions. You can use the chat box to ask any questions and start a discussion. So now it's kind of the free time. So anything you want to ask about the community of inquiry, go ahead.
I will say someone mentioned that if your survey instrument contained more than a few questions, students don't want to participate. That's absolutely true. I don't know if the survey, the COI survey, is something that you could really give to a class and have students actually answer. It's pretty long. That's something to keep in mind. But I do think it's a way to give people ideas about how they can create the environment that includes all the presences. Okay, sorry. It seems like a lot to tackle all at once. What is your recommendation for getting started? The most important thing to focus on? Well, I would say that to me, making sure, according to Garrison and the rest, it's that cognitive presence is the most important, but I think what we can control most is the teaching presence and setting up the environment that allows for cognitive presence. So I would say, if you're what can you focus on? It's designing a learning environment that is really going to allow students to be able to walk through those 4 phases. So to me, instructional design is most important, but of course I'm getting a doctorate in instructional technology, so I might be biased in that thinking. Requiring video conferences with students at least once a semester. I think that's a great idea, a great way to have teaching presence, social presence, hopefully cognitive presence as well. Suggestions for fostering different presences in the Q&A discussion board. I would say for social presence, allowing them to share information about each other, or you're saying they're asking you questions, not you asking them questions. That can definitely be difficult. One thing that I try to do even on those Q&A discussion boards is sometimes share something kind of funny that's related to whatever the course is about, or interesting, relevant in social media that's popping up that I think they might find interesting. And that way they know that I'm a real person, that I'm approachable, and hopefully that will get them asking me questions to have that social presence. And then I can, when they ask me questions, that's where teaching presence and cognitive presence can come out. But maybe other people have other ideas. How I use the COI, I call it COI, but I don't even know if that's actually what it's called. But the COI framework and an online course for an information literacy instruction, certainly. So I have definitely tried to use it. Thinking about student-student interaction, I had my students online complete a collaborative assignment for the final assignment. I split them into small groups. They did a lot of the course discussions as small groups, and I would always try to jump into those small groups and lead them through their discussions, and then they created this assignment with Google Docs or something. I think they all used Google Docs, and that was a way for them to go through, hopefully, the 4 phases of critical inquiry. When I'm teaching online, I am always trying to provide resources. That direct instruction is very easy to do by providing resources. Videos, I do occasional videos where it's my face as well, so that they see that I'm real and I'm able to connect with them in that way. I would say, so it's a lot of ways to use the framework, and as somebody said, sort of overwhelming, but I'm happy to talk to someone one-on-one about maybe how they could start using this in their instruction, or talk to them more about how I used it. So Annette says, looking for suggestions on being an embedded librarian in an online class for a different area. Oh, and Susan gave some advice there, making sure you're tied to a research project. Yep. I think Susan gives great advice here about making sure there's a reason for students to interact with you on that LMS.
Great. Thank you so much, Marcia, for answering all those questions. We still have a couple more minutes, so if anyone is interested in asking maybe a final question or two, there's still some time. As Marcia said when she was first introducing, you can still go on and continue the discussion on Twitter using the hashtag DLS inquiry. Marcia, would you mind passing the ball back to me?
Sorry, I had muted it, and so my Twitter handle is librarian Marcia, so I just wanted to advance to that slide before passing it off to you, Lindsay, but now you have it.
Great, and thank you again for your great presentation. I think so many of these ideas are really, really useful, and even, distance librarians can use a part of it to better engage. I've put it on Twitter that I'm constantly trying to use to duplicate that human interaction, that content in the online environment.
Absolutely. We want to give students the feeling that they're not missing out, that just because they're taking online courses or just because they're a distance learner doesn't mean that they're somehow missing out on that educational experience.
Exactly. Kristen actually just put the link for the survey in the chat box, and it's also available on the screen right now. I want to thank all of you for attending and participating in this midwinter virtual event today. I hope everyone is able to take something away that will help you in your distance library work. Additionally, I want to thank all the members of the DLS discussion group, the committee, for their work in planning and coordinating this session. We would like to continue providing this kind of programming if people think it's worthwhile for us to do so. In order for us to determine that, it's really important for us to hear from you about what you experienced today, and also what kind of events you would want in the future, what would be useful for you. So we ask each participant, please complete the feedback survey. That would just be wonderful, and it helps us really much in making sure we're supporting the distance learning section and distance librarianship. So I want to thank you again for your participation. Thank you, Marcia, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you so much. And as I said, I'm happy to continue conversations with people. I see I've got a couple new Twitter followers, so I'll be looking for you there. Thanks.